Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Odin's Movie Blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. And today we'll be talking about the Rise of Skywalker box office, which, according to Scotty Boy Mendelsohn, says it is plummeting. That's right, Star Wars Rise of Skywalker plummets 58% on Friday. So that's a 58% drop from the previous Friday. And this is something that I think many of us were speculating would happen, but we honestly did not know, because this is one of the weirdest box office movies of all time, just because of how it was released, when it was released, and how it's been comparing to some of the other films in the Skywalker or in the Disney trilogy Skywalker saga. And so when we look to these numbers, it's interesting because the movie is now looking to the point of it possibly, and yes, now I'm starting to say this with even more possibility, even more chance of this happening, not beating a film like Joker at the box office. Now, Joker did very well. It made over $1 billion, and it exceeded expectations. It made more than, it made less than 50% of its entire box office in the first 2 weeks, which goes to show you just how strong legs that movie had. It had a lot of rewatchability factor. A lot of people saw it multiple times. Rise of Skywalker doesn't really seem to be having that same impact, that same effect, even though it's positively reviewed by many of the audience members on sites like Rotten Tomatoes, etc., which obviously some people think are, being cooked in some way. I think that there's definitely some evidence of some type of trolling happening, but I think that happens on both sides, so I've never really jumped on that story because I think that you can find fake reviews that are giving a positive rating, but I think you can also find fake reviews that are giving a negative rating as well. And so I just look to the fact that, there are people out there that genuinely think the film is good or better than The Last Jedi, things like that. And so I take their words and I think, okay, well, if you want to stick with that, that's fine. Even though I do think that this film is objectively worse just because it is 3 films plastered into one, and it's just impossible for that kind of a narrative to be able to really hold up over time. It might get you in the feels, it might give you nostalgia, but once that nostalgia fades away and once you start to actually have to sit back and think, things I don't think are going to work out nearly as much. And the box office seems to be indicating that as much, that people are kind of tired of Star Wars. And I think that the reason why is not because they're tired of the Star Wars brand in general. The proof of that I have is just look at how successful The Mandalorian is. Look at how many Disney Plus subscriptions were gotten and then canceled once The Mandalorian was over. I think that goes to show you that with things like Baby Yoda, etc., the pop culture is very pro Star Wars. People want to watch Star Wars. People are excited for Star Wars only when it's good Star Wars. And I think that's the big difference here, is that it's not that they're rejecting Star Wars at the box office, it's that they're rejecting poor or even mediocre at best Star Wars at the box office. So as you can see here, in a skewed way, The Rise of Skywalker has performed the opposite of The Last Jedi, with strong initial weekdays tapering off after Christmas. Walt Disney and Lucasfilm's Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker fell 57.8% on its third Friday, earning another $11 million to top the box office and bring its 15-day cumulative total to 428. That sets the stage for a likely $37 million or 49% drop, so that could actually be even less. Obviously, we'll have to wait until tomorrow before we get those estimates, but going into the weekend, many people suspected that it would have a 50% or around a 50% drop in the third weekend, which I thought was pretty much going to be the death nail of this film ever being able to reach $1.2 billion. So it's now looking more likely that it'll top off somewhere around $1.1 billion. But of course, we'll have to wait for those numbers to come in, because at the end of the day, there is no real competition in the month of January, at least for the next couple of weeks. There's a couple of films coming out that might be able to take some box office away, but we'll have to wait and see how those numbers hold out. So weekend gross, 49% drop, and a 17-day domestic cumulative of $454 million. And if the 49-51 split holds, it'll make around $920 million worldwide by the end of this weekend. So for anyone that might be looking at that number and saying that's the final, no, that's at the end of the third weekend, $920 million, which means that it's going to have to make another $80 million to get to the billion-dollar mark, which personally I think it's going to still reach. I think that based on the models that I've been following, it seems very likely that it's $1 billion is guaranteed at this point. However, the fact that we are not sure, and it's very unclear about where on that billion-dollar scale it's going to fall, I think is going to be the real story, especially when I start comparing it to films like Joker that made a little over $1 billion, but were made for significantly less money and had a giant profit margin, especially when we don't know really all the details about how much they spent on production for this film, let alone how much they spent on marketing for this film, because if we can say anything about this film, the marketing for it was absolutely insane. They had reviews, they had clips everywhere. They were releasing stuff every 5 seconds, it seemed there were new clips, new TV spots. And so I wouldn't be surprised if their marketing budget was much higher than normal films. And maybe that's going to impact how much actual profit, net profit, this film can actually make. That drop is larger than the 44 to 48% drops for the 5 of the Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings Hobbit films. Fellowship fell 40% in the third weekend, and a 39% drop of J.J. Abrams' The Force Awakens. So as you can see, definitely falling very far behind what The Force Awakens did, as no movie has really been able to match its success in the Disney Star Wars saga. So looking at the numbers themselves, the one thing that I kind of want to look to is the fact that you have a 58% drop, and yet films like Jumanji: The Next Level are having drops in the 20s, because people are still going to see those movies, and people are actually going to see these movies again, even, because it seems that the legs of these films are doing pretty well. After it being out for 22 days, it's still being in 4,000 theaters, and it's only making about $3 million less than The Rise of Skywalker. That's insane. If you had asked me 5 years ago that a Jumanji film would be almost equally performing on a day-to-day level with a Star Wars movie, I would have rightfully laughed in your face. And yet here we are, where the film is not really that far behind The Rise of Skywalker, and The Rise of Skywalker is dropping 58% here on this Friday. Now, many people think that Saturday and Sunday numbers are going to be a little bit better, especially when the only new movie coming out this weekend with any competition is The Grudge, which I don't have any plans to see. I don't know about you. So that's not going to really take a whole lot of money away from it. Not to mention, I don't think really the people going to see The Grudge are the same audience that would be going to see Star Wars. So once again, no competition. So we'll have to wait and see what the final drop is. But it's going to be somewhere around 50%, I could imagine. Basically, I was talking about this last time I did the video, where I said if the drop is between 30 and 40%, that, Star Wars would definitely be on track to possibly getting to that 1.2, even $1.3 billion range. But because now we're looking at a 50%, if not higher than 50% drop in the third weekend, I just don't really see an option, or don't really see a place where this film is going to make $1.2 billion. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Going to the actual numbers themselves, again, it's made $428 million here domestically, $423 million in the international marketplace. So we see that it's really not outperforming in the international marketplace, because, as I've said previously, this film is not doing anywhere near the numbers that the previous Star Wars films have done in the international marketplace. And I think the reason why is because people are just tired of mediocre to poor films. I think that the so-called Star Wars fatigue is not because of Star Wars content, but because it's just not good content. So it's now made a total of $851 million. And where does that fall in line with the overall chart that I've been having? So again, $851 million is how much it's made, meaning it's still not broken even. So it still needs to make another $25 million before it breaks even, which most likely will be this weekend. So just keep in mind that by the end of this weekend, you're looking at a film that will have broken even by my, I think, very conservative estimates for what the budget and marketing costs were. But you're looking at a film that is not likely going to make massive amounts of profits, especially when you compare it to other films that cost significantly less money to make. Looking at you, Joker. So Joker, for anyone that wants to know, made around $1.06 billion. So now there is a situation. Now there's a scenario where The Rise of Skywalker, which costs so much more, again, around $350 million to make versus the $55 million production budget of Joker, you could see either Rise of Skywalker lose to Joker or potentially just make a little bit more than Joker. And I think that is a huge win for Warner Brothers. I think also that is a huge loss for Disney. And hopefully that is a giant wake-up call for them to realize, yeah, you know what, maybe we should start to rethink things, especially with our leadership. People like Kathleen Kennedy have obviously shown themselves to not really be worthy of the position of running Star Wars, seeing that they have pretty much destroyed the IP at this point. Again, when you have a film that's barely ahead of a film like Jumanji 3, I'm sorry, but that is going to spell some problems. Let's go ahead and go to the comparison chart between The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. This is a number that I've been following for a while. So as you can see, on the third Friday, Last Jedi had made $19 million because it actually had a very strong post-Christmas weekday total, which we really haven't seen from The Rise of Skywalker. Again, it did have a strong New Year's Day, but then tapered off 9 million and then 11 million on Friday. So now the difference between them two is about $50 million. Again, $50 to $60 million. No, actually, no, $60 million. So the Rise of Skywalker's domestic total is at $428 million. At the same time, in its run, The Last Jedi was at $483 million. And so that's now looking like that's going to stick. You're going to see that difference pretty much not move at any point in time. You still have about $100 million difference or so in the overall worldwide totals between the film. And again, just comparing what these films are making. And $620 million was the entire domestic cum for The Last Jedi, making $628 when you adjust for inflation, where the international box office was around $712 million, where for the worldwide total was $1.3 billion. You're not going to see $712 million in the worldwide box office for this film. You're looking at a film that probably is going to top out around 500, 550 or so. And then you're looking at even Scotty Boy Mendelsohn himself is talking about what can we expect this film to actually make. And he says that the best case scenario for The Last Jedi or for The Rise of Skywalker is for the film to end a domestic total of 545 to 565 million. So again, the best case scenario for Rise of Skywalker, 545 to 565. That's versus the 628 when adjusted for inflation million dollars that The Last Jedi made. That's a gigantic drop in the domestic marketplace. And if these drops in the international marketplace hold, as I said, if you have 545 million and it only makes about 500 million or a little over 500 million in the worldwide or international marketplace, you're looking at a film that's just barely eking out the $1.1 billion. And if the number is the worst case scenario, which $515 million, and let's assume that's a worst case scenario also for the international marketplace as well, you're looking at a film that could just come in under a film like Joker. So what does this say? All this tells me is that when you look back to the criticisms that were levied by the Phantom Menace, I think that we are basically being proven correct here. Some people might try and spin it to say, oh, but it's still making money, and so therefore you were wrong. But when you compare it to the drops of the previous films in the franchise, and when you compare it to the fact that no other Star Wars trilogy has ever had this happen where the last film made the least amount of money and that you've had this consistent drop in every single country, what does that tell you? It tells you that people are done with it. That people are through with it. And it all comes back to the fact that they decided to crap on the hardcore fans to try and, reach out to the normies, but they hadn't been able to, really set the stage for them being able to do that. Again, the MCU, it took them a long time before they were able to say, screw you comics fans, now we're focusing just on the normies, which is why they were able to build up their films to a $2.7 billion opening or $2.7 billion total for a film like Endgame. They didn't. They tried to basically rush it too quickly as far as saying, screw you to the fans. And the fans said, oh, you're going to say screw you? Okay, fine. We're just not going to show up anymore. And that led to things like Star Wars Solo Star Wars Story losing money. And now it looks like Rise of Skywalker barely breaking even. And if making any profit, not nearly as much to justify its entire production budget. Anyway, let me know your thoughts about this. What do you think the final domestic cum and the foreign cum are going to be? So this film is pretty much all but guaranteed to cross $1 billion mark, but even people like Sky Boy Mendelsohn are now talking about that $1 billion, saying it is expected to make $1 billion at this point. It's not even it's guaranteed to make $1 billion or it's going to fly past $1 billion. It's instead, a $515 to $565 million domestic and $1 billion plus worldwide gross for Star Wars would have meant a lot more for Disney in 2020 than it does in 2019. So once again, you're seeing that the excitement over this film and even the defense of this film is falling very quickly apart. But anyway, let me know your thoughts about that and all the stuff we talked about in the comments section below. If you like this video, smash the like button, give me a subscribe, it helps me out a lot. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful day, and as always, God bless.